Welcome, everyone. If this voice sounds familiar to you, then you're not mistaken. Tweak is back on Contact Lost. So, welcome to the Contact Lost podcast. Tweak is back after a hiatus. I'm coming back because I figured out that I cannot live without this. It's too cool doing the podcast. It's too cool speaking to famous people. It's too cool talking about this game, sometimes talking nonsense, joking, and generally exchanging thoughts about this amazing game. So much stuff is happening right now. So many tournaments, so many news about the new edition and stuff. I just can't imagine not being part of it. So I'm back, and I hope that you will stick around to listen to more episodes that hopefully now will be more regular. If you haven't seen Joker and Vitalis while I was away, they set up a website where I think that we only have one article so far talking about their participation in a certain event in Toruń in Poland, but I already have some interviews lined up with people from Poland who went to foreign tournaments, who went to Polish tournaments, who won them. They are going to talk about their armies, about their achievements, about their membership in Team Poland. So I think a lot of interesting stuff is going to happen both on YouTube, on the podcast side, and on the website. So stay tuned because more stuff is coming. And today we have a special guest. You're watching this on YouTube, so you probably have seen the title already. So yeah, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Alex Harrison.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, Alex. So thanks for joining me. I brought you in because, again, as many people probably already know, you have taken the second place at Manchester. A huge event, huge UKTC event. So congratulations on that. That's no
Thank
small
you.
feat. You came second after Manichima. So
Yes.
yeah, that's absolutely amazing. With so many people around. We will be breaking this into two parts, where the first part, the one that you're listening to right now, will focus on the list, the UKTC terrain, and how the list generally performs and how it tackles certain armies, certain opponents. While the second part will focus on the actual games that Alex played. So make sure that you tune in for part two that will be released probably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But perhaps to our listeners who are finding out for the first time who you are and what the UKTC is, maybe a couple words about yourself.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Alex. I've been playing on the tournament scene for well over 10 years now. Um, I am currently part of the Team England WTC team, which will be traveling over to Belgium this year to represent the country. Um, I tend to play numerous different armies. However, my roots sort of fall back to Space Wolves and Tau as my two sort of big armies. Um, both of which haven't been doing so well up until recently. Tau have had their ups and downs. Space Wolves have risen up the ranks thanks to the Space Marine nonsense that's going on at the moment, which I'm sure we'll discuss in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, I used to be part of the Glasshammer Gaming Group. Had to split off there due to moving away from near where Manny and Dan Bates, who run the club, live.
Mm-hmm.
And now, yeah, I'm currently in London enjoying the sights around here. So, yeah, that's sort of my background. I've been part of the England team now also for about 9 years, I think, 8 years off the top of my head. So yeah, no, I've got a bit of experience in tournament play.
Yeah. So to people from, let's say, the West, your name is well known and your achievements as well. To the Polish listeners, maybe not so much, but we are going to change that, or we are changing that as we speak. So last time we spoke, I think it was something like half a year ago. You've won an event, and back then you were playing Tau.
Yes.
Uh, then uh, along the way, LGT happened. We were there with Vitalis and Joker. I know you were playing Necrons back then.
Right. Yeah.
Now Space Wolves. So you said that Space Wolves and Tau are your original armies and so on. Necrons happened along the way. So
Yeah,
okay, so you play plenty of armies, and I guess you have access to pretty much all of them if you need to.
yeah.
So tell us specifically why Space Wolves now, and especially that you have other armies at hand. I mean, there are Dark Angels, Iron Hands, those popular armies that other strong players from the UKTC pick. Why did you pick Space Wolves? Is there any specific reason, or is it just nostalgia and sentiment?
Sure, yeah. I guess it's a mixture. So unbeknownst to most people, although I am a competitive player, I have this thing where I kind of don't enjoy using like I guess the S tier army that's currently being played. Now, don't get me wrong, I have used very strong meta armies, and I continue to do so. However, I like to try and make them a little bit more innovative, or um, maybe use something that kind of counters the meta. One example was at the LGT, not last year, the year before that. I brought a Death Watch army when everyone was using AdMech, and a lot of the top players at the time were jumping on the AdMech train. And I've always been the kind of person to go, okay, what's the current meta, and how can I design a list that if I've run into that list, I at least have a very good chance of beating that army, or potentially just straight up hard countering it. So with that Deathwatch army as an example, um, it was completely designed with AdMech flyers and AdMech infantry in mind. And that's why I managed to get to the final, but unfortunately, that's where the luck kind of ended rather quickly. But I won't go into that.
Yeah, I think most people remember that
Yeah,
memorable final.
sure. Yeah. So that was definitely a wake up call for me.
Hmm.
Try to be make some spicy list work. But thanks for that, Malik. Anyway, so nothing's changed. So I understand that everyone is using Dark Angels. I find that type of army very bland, boring. There's nothing interesting about having a very ridiculously overpowered army where you're just immune to half the damage, if not more of the damage out there, whilst retaining a solid fire base or whatnot. So I like to look at the meta, especially in the UK, because the meta evolves very quickly, but also it's quite well known to at least the top caliber players. Like we're all either on the same team, we're all part of Team England as an
Hmm.
example, or you kind of hear through friends what people are what each other are testing, and then obviously you see the results of those top players. Excuse me, such as Manny Chima, who, congratulations to him, um, did really well at the Manchester GT. He ended up winning the event. Spoiler alert.
Hmm.
So you do see the kind of results, I think, in your local meta, as well as the world meta now is all sort of easily accessible, and we all sort of play on TTS as well to get a good grasp of how these armies work. So with that in mind, I wanted to make a list which I had help with. I have a group of friends, also tournament goers. I'll give them a bit of a shout out: Chris Kinnair, James Ramsey, and Andy Oakham. And we play a lot of TTS where we can try stuff out, and we all like to try something a little bit different. And that's actually how uh, the Necron list that we used at the ITT, where we won recently,
Hmm.
was created. We tested that out, gave ideas back and forth on how we can make that stronger versus certain meta armies, like for example Guard, where it did very well against, and that's how we sort of develop a list. So I designed this list predominantly around the new Desolator models. Now
Right.
now everyone now probably knows how lethal they are, but at the time a lot of players had written them off, and my group included. No one was looking at them, no one really spoke about them, and I like to look outside the box. I sometimes go on Wikipedia and go, right, what units can I actually make good in this current meta? What do armies struggle with? Okay, there's guard right now, for example. So how can Marines deal with guard? Oh, well, let's look at Iron Hands. So I sat there and made an Iron Hands list, and I put it on the table. I put 3 units of 5 Desolators in. My friends that I play with were watching it, and they were like, "Oh my god, these are ridiculously good! Like what? Like why did we not look at these before?" And that's when it sparked conversations, right? How could we, I guess the best word is abuse this new unit? And that's where we decided to fall on Space Wolves. And we designed the list from the ground up utilizing the Desolator unit. Now, we could have easily gone to the Dark Angel list and added them to that, which Manny eventually did. But we wanted to be a little bit different, and we tried to make the list a bit more fun. And I did say to myself, like, I'm a Space Wolf player at heart, so I really want to make this work. And the reason why we decided on Space Wolves specifically was because of a key stratagem called Keen Senses. So Keen Senses allows that Desolator unit to basically power up tenfold. You go from indirectly shooting on 4s, and then if you move, you hit on 5s, to then, due to old wording where it ignores ballistic skill and hit modifiers, to hitting on 3s even if you move the unit. So we looked at that and thought, wow, that's like a really good combination, because there's not many units in the Space Wolf army where you'll be utilizing Keen Senses on like turn 1 or 2, whereas this unit you can use it from the get-go and actually get a lot out of it. So so that was the premises of the list, and then it was kind of, right, what else works? So what I'm going to do is I'll go through my list now, and then afterwards I'll explain why we made these choices.
Sure.
So I'll start from the top. So I had a Chapter Master on a bike with a Thunderhammer and a Combi Melter. He had Saga of the Hunter as an additional warlord trait, and then he had Rites of War as a base warlord trait. And he also had the Armor of Rust Relic.
So a beat stick with Fight Last.
Correct, yes. Then I had, yes, and an Aura of Obsec. I also had a Primaris Lieutenant. Now, this for some reason is super cheap for what you get. You get a baseline combat character with a Mastercrafted Power Sword, a Storm Shield, and a cheeky little Volkite pistol. And you get a Lieutenant Aura for 65 points. Comes on a nice big base as well, so fantastic little character there. I then decided to skip the troops completely. Again, I'll go into why in a moment. Then onto my elites, which, being the Arcs of Omen detachment, I decided to take the maximum of, was 3 units of 5 Wolfgard, and they were all equipped the same. Each squad had jump packs, one lightning claw. I keep calling them wolf claws. One lightning claw and one combi melter, and then the sergeant or the pack leader had a thunder hammer instead of a lightning claw, simply because he gets an extra attack. So you're kind of abusing that. I then went with 3 units of Wolfen, which not many people have seen for a long time.
Well missed.
Yeah.
Back.
And then I went with fast attack choices were 3 of the same units of Sky Claws. There were 6-man units. They each had 2 melter guns, and then there was a Wolfgard pack leader attached with a combi melter and a thunder hammer, and the sergeant had a power fist as well. So
nice
very
mixture of everything.
Yeah, very flexible unit and quite cheap at 110 points. And then my heavy support choice was 8 Desolators with a upgraded sergeant with a Venga launcher, which was mastercrafted, and that allowed it to be flat 3 damage. And then 2 units of Long Fangs, both just max gravs. One had 5 grav cannons, one had 4 grav cannons, so one unit was bigger than the other. And they both had a sergeant with a power fist and a plasma gun, and a Wolfgard Terminator pack leader with a Thunderhammer, Storm Shield, Terminator armor, and Cyclone missile launcher. And that was the entire army.
And, well, let's not forget about what you mentioned before, the Desolation Marines.
Yes, I did mention them, I think, before the long
Oh,
fan.
I'm
I
sorry, might
apologize
have
for that.
missed them. Okay, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. So yeah, that's the list. So I just want to discuss a few
Hmm.
points on because some people have definitely spoken to me about the list and are confused with some tech choices. So
Yeah, I'll have some questions as well because
sure.
I used to play Space Wolves as well, and some of the things raise an eyebrow.
Yeah, definitely. So I and I think a lot of players that go to a tournament that attempt to win it at least or have a vague idea of how well they want to do tend to look at the other players that are attending. So I knew what players were in attendance, and I knew that the majority of them were playing some form of Space Marines, whether that be Iron Hands or Dark Angels, but predominantly I was thinking Dark Angels. Now, that could obviously change. Some players might throw a spanner in the works last minute and decide to change what they're going to use. But the two big players that I would say could contest those top spots in the UK that were running guard, as an example, weren't in attendance, and those were
Hmm.
both Nassim and David Gaylard,
Okay.
both great players. Um, so I knew that guard wasn't a big factor, even though Desolators were there to counter. So I decided to drop a unit of infiltrators. I decided that that was 100 points of 5 Marines that were literally doing nothing. Okay, it sounds silly, but literally doing nothing against the certain matchups that I wanted to beat. So I decided to drop them. Against Dark Angels, they literally do nothing. It's just more Marines to die, and you're paying an increased cost for 5 basic Marines that literally have no impact on the game apart from a bit of forward deploy.
Hmm.
Another choice with the Bike Captain. Um, yes, he's a chapter master and he gives the reroll aura out. So you would some people would think, oh, why doesn't he just sit the back where you're paying points for the Thunderhammer and the bike and all that stuff? He had a multi roll, so he had the option of flinging forward, excuse me, flinging forward, throwing a straight last onto an enemy unit, which gives multiple units of Wolfen a chance to charge in, or Wolfgard or Wolfen, and not have that risk of being interrupted. And that could be a 10-man brick of Dark Angel Terminators, as an example. And that sort of guarantees you the chance of making sure that unit's dead without receiving massive losses in return.
Hmm.
And with that ability, with his advanced and charge ability, that means he could do that anywhere and anywhere when you wanted to. And he also then gains an aura of advance and charge, which is situational but is useful to have.
Yeah, I wanted
And
to ask about that because the Saga of the Hunter, it is. Yeah, is it something that Space Wolves players now pick sort of automatically? Like it seems 4 months, if not longer, that this is the only warlord trait, apart from maybe Rites of Battle, that you see on Space Wolves Warlords. Does that mean that others are not worth considering? Is this the go-to one? Because you seem to sound like this is something optional. It's it's good to have, but not
sure.
always necessary. So why this one and not yet another one?
Yeah, so there's two questions there. So I'll answer the first one. The reason why it's optional, at least for me, is because it's not like I've designed this list around it, because it is a situational piece. It's not something that I'm going to throw the captain out to get a charge, proc that saga, allowing it to become an aura. Because by the time you tend to pop it, your army's in the middle of the board anyway, especially with 9th edition and the boards becoming smaller.
Hmm.
And the way the UKTC terrain, which we can discuss in a moment, is it's a lot easier for you to get a charge off from turn 2 anyway without advance and charge. And because you don't have it turn 1 unless your opponent literally gives you it, which never happened, then you're very rarely using it. What I actually found is it automatically stopped people taking behind enemy lines, which is a
Hmm.
really strong stratagem. Yeah, because a lot of Marine players were taking it with their land speeders, where they would just fling a land speeder forward into your back line,
Jump out
and
with the scouts or something and
yeah.
score it easily. Yeah, get a
Now,
useful.
if your opponent does that turn 1, your turn 1, your Wolf Lord goes across, charges that unit, and now you have an army of advance and charge for like literally
Hmm.
free.
Yep.
Which I think is, really nice to have,
Yeah,
especially from turn one.
that's a brilliant argument. Yeah.
Yeah, so that instantly just completely, because as soon as you tell your opponent that, as long as they're smart, they're not going to take
Hmm.
behind enemy lines. On top of that, you have obviously the stratagem for space walls, which you can heroically intervene 6. So you can actually stop your opponent getting behind enemy lines for at least 2 turns anyway, because they can't fit in your deployment zone without you heroically intervening and potentially killing a land speeder or 5 scouts.
Yeah, that's good thinking.
So that was my thought process for that, on why it was like a nice addition, but not something I revolve the list around. But with it being like the only staple one, yeah, it's because of just the easiness of getting the Saga Aura, and also because it's just so good on a bike captain. Auto advancing 6, so it can move 20 inches and charge, is just really nice to sort of give a bit of backup to a unit, and invaluable of providing that reroll 1 aura to wherever you need it. The rest of them are so situational and not as impactful, and some are just plain rubbish. The Warrior Born giving you D3 extra attacks, but then you're not getting shock assault, so it's kind of like if you roll a 1 or a 2, it's exactly the same.
Yeah,
It's
if
not
it
giving
was
you
like
any.
D3+1 at least or something,
Yeah,
then yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's not as wild. And then the other one, which is good, Saga of the Bear. Again, you need to be in harm's way for it to be really useful. Like 6+ Finna Pain on
Mm.
your captain isn't overly great for a warlord trait, and however, the Saga is fantastic. It becomes an aura. Then everything gets a 6+ Finna Pain. But to get it, you need to lose a wound. So
Eh,
it's
yeah, I know.
it's frustrating. So yeah, there's some which just are rubbish, and there's some which are just very hard to proc. So that is why Saga the Hunter is always the sort of fallback option, and it is a great option at that. So yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, that's the list, and I'm gonna go further down and discuss why, like, for example, I only took 8 Desolators. So 8 Desolators was, in my opinion, the just right amount to deal enough damage to kill certain units. So they are expensive. They're 35 points a model. And what I found was when I was testing, I was like, okay, what do I need to kill? I need to kill, this unit, that unit, whatever. 8 was just enough, like indirect firepower to kill a unit of 10 Kazakin, for example, or like 5 Banshees or whatever, like Eldar unit. So I wasn't really fussed about the extra 70 points, and 70 points does give you a lot to play with in the list. And the reason why I took the Master Crafted option, and I know some people, thought, oh wow, you could do that, that's really good. It was actually specifically for one reason and one reason only. It was literally just to kill land speeders.
Hmm.
And some people thought, oh, that's really good at killing Terminators. Well, no, it's not. They still get a 2-up save. That's not why I took it. It was literally just to be able to have that chance, and it is a chance because you're not guaranteed, but to kill land speeders from afar, like turns 1, 2, and 3, is really annoying for Marine players. Some Marine armies rely on those land speeders and land speeder storms. Okay, they're 7 wounds, but still, just to go grab them objectives without overcommitting a really strong unit, such as like Vanguard vets or a character or something like
Hmm.
that. And they're super fast. So if you get rid of that, that really limits your capabilities. So that was literally the only reason I took it. There's obviously some situations where it's really helpful, that extra damage, but that was the main reason I picked that. So yeah, that's like all the CPs used. I left myself with 1, and the main reason I left myself with 1 was to give myself access to a stratagem called Outflank, which we all know as now strategic reserve. However, those that played, the old rules used to call it outflank, and I believe some players still call it, I'm going to put this unit in outflank,
Hmm.
etc. I know I do sometimes. But this is a specific Space Wolf stratagem which is really strong, and it terrifies everyone. So it's an ability to put a unit into strategic reserve effectively. So it comes on from turn 2, but it can come on from any board edge. So it ignores the rules for, not being able to
Yeah.
appear in your deployment zone or back edge until turn 3, etc. You can literally bring that on any board edge on turn 2 and 3. Excuse me. And I always did that on the big unit of Grav. Every single turn, every single game, sorry. And the reason for that was not just because of the tactical flexibility that gives, but just to keep my opponent honest. It is so scary to have a big unit of Grav appear behind or near or get angles to a unit that you've left behind, and you can keen senses them if required, and they will absolutely obliterate anything that's back there. You've got the Cherub to double shoot either one of the Grav or the Cyclone missile launcher, and you've got the I can't remember what it's called, the Auspex or Omnispex or whatever it's called, to give ballistic skill 2 base to one of the unit models as well. So that unit's super scary, and I did that most games. I think there was only 1 or 2 games I didn't use that strat. So that was just a little bit of tech option there.
That's great. And I need to ask about the second unit of Longfangs, because again, I understand that the meta has shifted. The most of the things are now free, but when I played Space Wolves a year ago, multi-meltas were the go-to weapons. Yep. Now, when I was trying, like last week, I was trying to build a Space Wolves list. I was torn between actually all of the options, and even last cannons seemed worthy. So why did you go specifically with a second unit of Grav and not, for example, multi-melta?
Okay, so we actually did test the las cannons, and the range was really nice. But if you actually do the maths on, say, shooting a Lehman Russ, which is, usually the big option to go for.
Yeah.
If that Lehman Russ hasn't popped the -1 damage, excuse me, then the Grav statistically does about the same damage, if not potentially has the chance of spiking and doing more, even against vehicles when you're winning on 5s. So that was something where, it was very strange because I didn't believe my friends when they told me. But we did a bit of rolling, we did a bit of math hammer, all that stuff, and we actually found that it is so similar that you may as well just take the Grav because it's much better against everything else. So that was the reason against the las cannons. The reason against the multi-melters was simple: points. You have to pay 40 points extra for the whole unit to have multi-melters. And for them to be effective, you need to be within 12 inches, which is very, very situational. So, and I don't believe the list needs it with the Desolators, direct firing, or the amount of combi melters I have in the list anyway.
I think it was Jeremy from StatsCheck or someone who stopped calling Space Wolves and started calling them Melta Rats, just because of the amount of meltas over there.
I think I've got 24 melta guns
in this
insane.
Army,
so I wasn't lacking in that anti-tank, and then obviously all the Thunderhammers as well. But yeah, that's the reason for that. And then finally, just one more thing I wanted to cover was the 3 units of Wolfen. So yeah, a lot of people were like really confused, but appreciative of the fact that I took Wolfen. It is again a bit of a tech choice, and the reason why I took them was there was a few reasons. So reason number one, World Eaters. Okay, so World Eaters have a very easy capability of killing Marines, and they also have a capability of doing that turn 1, especially in some deployments at the UKTC. So I was a bit worried about that. So I was like, right, how can I stop that? Oh yeah, I can literally just trade 2 units of Wolfen at the front, where these pre-game moving, oh god, what they call it, 8 bound, can literally bound over and then end up killing my unit Wolfen, who then kill them back. And so, in my opinion, I'm up a trade with that, because that's their sort of big move, and I've just countered it with Wolfen.
Yeah.
That I can wrap my army with. And then the second option was the second reason for taking them was also, the Dark Angels. At the time, the Dark Angel list was very different to what I was expecting it to be when I submit that list. So when I tested them, Manny Chima at the time was using attack bikes, and
Hmm.
attack bikes were there mostly to deal with guard. They weren't really to deal with things like Wolfen and stuff like that. They don't
Yeah,
really volume.
I think he teched specifically to face David Gaillard, which happened in Southampton. So
Yes,
yeah.
correct. So, but not just that. Other players that were taking Dark Angels, such as Mike Porter, like I couldn't see the lists, but I knew they were playing them. I had a rough idea that the lists, didn't have mass amounts of firepower, so Wolfen could get across the board, and they're really tough to deal with for combat armies, like Terminators that want to go in, beat you up, and you could potentially lose 3 or 4 Terminators on return. I think the average was 3. If you manage to get the charge off to get the +1 to hit. Sorry, I actually didn't mention the army is it Born Heroes for +1 to hit on the charge, and then
The Wind of Rage.
Whirlwind of Rage for exploding
Yeah,
sixes.
I think it
Yeah.
doesn't come as any surprise.
Yeah, so the Wolfen always count as being an assault doctrine, so they get double exploding sixes. So they're really good in combat, and I equip them with 4 Thunderhammer Storm Shields and 1 double Lightning Claw, or I think they do call them Wolfen Frost
Frostclaw.
Claws.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they are very, very good at killing pretty much anything. I ended up playing Orcs, for example, and they had a horrible time dealing with them because they were always trading up. So yeah, they were just something I just felt were really good into the meta and were something that people, hate fight on death stuff. So I thought, why not take 3 units of them?
Wonderful.
So yeah, I think that's like the list covered in its entirety and the reasons for why I sort of picked most of the stuff.
So I have one more question. Well,
Sure.
2. The first one is strictly about some choices. The second one I'll use as a segue to also maybe talk about the UKTC and the terrain. But the first
Yes.
one, again, when I was putting up lists a year ago, Wolfgard absolutely were a thing. You started building the list with 15 Wolfgard or more.
Yeah.
But they were usually kitted out with a claw and a storm shield.
Yep.
Now I see lightning claws are still there, but instead they are combi melters. Doesn't that make the unit much more vulnerable to out of line shooting, stuff like that? Because they need to most of the time advance uh, on the table. So aren't you worried or weren't you worried when you were going into the event that your Wolfguard would melt easily?
Yeah, so it's a bit naive of myself, but I had a feeling that people were going to potentially take Desolators, but I didn't think I would see them in the volume that people did take them.
Yeah.
So that was mainly why. So out of direct shooting tends to come from currently like Eldar and Guard.
Mhm.
And Guard out line of sight shooting, you tend to get a save of about 3 up or a 2 up in cover. So it's not like super scary. So I wasn't fussed about that, but obviously with Desolators being a thing now, looking back in hindsight, I would have loved to have 1 or 2 Storm Shields in the
Mhm.
squads. Definitely. Because the issue with the UKTC terrain is a lot of the Ls that are in the middle of the board, or and some of which are in your deployment zone, you can't be in cover and be hidden because they don't have bases, and if you do touch them, they have wide open windows. So hindsight, I would have definitely preferred a couple of storm shields. However, whilst building the list, it wasn't a massive concern,
Yeah. Okay.
and combi melters were free, so I was getting more value. And even if there were certain units that could deal with them, which still could have, especially in combat, I wanted to get max redundancy out of the army. By not having storm shields, when I create the list, I could get more stuff like more sky claws. So I had so many marines in this army.
Okay. So just to paint the picture, and I maybe should have mentioned that at the very beginning. Going into this weekend, it was very interesting because I firstly paid more attention to one of the Polish tournaments, obviously, because we had the Krakow Arena happen this weekend as well, and the Polish 40K League Facebook account pasted or posted like an interesting summary of like all the armies that are coming, and some statistics. And the statistics focused mainly on the amount of Terminators that players were taking.
Oh
So
no.
there were, I think, 85 players. Altogether, they took about 349 Terminators, out of which
Jesus.
299 were Dark Angels Terminators. There were 79 Armigers, and 7 Guard players took 200 Kasserkin. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean that's overwhelming in itself, but no mention of Desolation Squads. And then last week I listened to Stats Check, and I listened to Innes talking about, the lists were already published, and it turns out that there was Manny with, like, I think 20 Desolators,
Yep.
and uh, Ezekiel or Azrael or one of the characters. There were you, Innes, uh, Brian Sipe, Ben Pritchard, and in the top 10 we also had David Irving, and yeah, I think that's it. But
Th-
most of the people brought Desolators. It seems like the UK meta, the UK players figured out what rocks way sooner than the
Yeah.
Polish players.
I mean, UK meta is always ahead, right? No, I'm joking.
This time,
Yeah.
definitely.
No, we do act quite quick, in that sense. But yeah, even I was surprised. I didn't think many people were looking at them. I thought it was kind of, oh, this is quite a good tech piece, especially like considering I'd only tested it a few days before list submission,
Hmm.
and that sort of sparked the interest and conversation amongst my teammates. So to see that everyone had also seen that, because all the Reddit forums and all that stuff, everything online, like the competitive 40K, Facebook groups, etc., wrote them off like straight away, saying
Yep.
they're too expensive, the stat line isn't that great. And I didn't
And they
really,
look stupid.
and they look, yeah, and they definitely look wild. I'll give you that. But I like new units. I really looked into the Brutalist Dreadnought, trying to make that work. I just couldn't. It was too expensive. Obviously the new Primaris Lieutenant was cheap. He's a given. So anything that comes out, especially in a faction that I have a lot of experience with in general, like I've got loads of Marines. I do like Marine armies. I always like to try and see what chapter I can make this unit work in.
Hmm.
So I just got quite lucky in the sense that, we figured out something for Space Wars, but it turns out everyone else must have thought the same thing, clicked on and gone out there and bought a load of them. One of the players that didn't actually attend in the end, unfortunately, who I was looking forward to seeing, was a friend of mine called Malik. Really good player. Hasn't been hitting the tournament scene in the UK for a while now, but I was excited to see him come back. He had a very wild list with 25 Desolators,
Yep.
supported by a Relic Scorpius Whirlwind. So he literally was playing that as if he was playing his old Imperial Fist artillery list. RIP to that list. Thank God that's dead. Um, and it literally made me smile when I read it. Like I was terrified of it as well. Actually, I was like, "This is actually quite scary if he goes first against anything. That's gonna do a lot of damage." With Azrael like giving all the rerolls and stuff, because Dark Angels get the +1 to hit. So that was super scary. But yeah, I think I don't know what happened. He didn't turn up in the end, which is a shame. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was crazy. Our meta is always a bit like that. It would just come out with some wild stuff.
Yeah, but to demonstrate, how bad it is right now, even Mike Porter was using Space
Yeah,
Marines, and even Mike Porter brought Desolation Squads. So,
it
yeah,
is depressing. Like I said earlier, I like to counter the meta, and the only way to counter the meta is literally with Space Marines. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
but the funniest part is I learned that I think Brian faced one of Games Workshop representatives during the
Yes,
tournament, and the guy didn't really think that this unit was OP. He didn't assume or
he was very
understand what.
surprised.
Yeah, so Brian brutally explained, what the unit does, or demonstrated what the unit does during the game, and yeah, man, maybe this will influence the next balance slate. I don't think so. Probably 10th edition. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. So yeah, I wanted to segue to something well, interconnected but different. When I was
Excuse me.
picking up Space Wolves again a year ago.
Yep.
Like the player who was like the most prominent with them was Hammy Paris, and Hammy explained on multiple episodes of his podcasts or on his channel he enjoys playing player place terrain because with Space Wolves, you can pretty much design your path to the center of the table. You can pretty much design how you are going to be moving because you can set the terrain pieces in such a way that your Vanguard vets or, well, your Wolfgard can jump from one terrain piece to another to hide. And it just gives you more survivability and actual chance against shooting armies. How do Space Wolves work in the UKTC terrain? I mean, you already touched on it a little bit, but do they hide, or and do they move, effectively and efficiently, or do you have to put things in reserve now that it's free?
Sure. So I want to start with actually player place terrain. I disagree with that point that he made because although it gives you the chance to place a terrain piece in the middle to move into, if your opponent's playing a gunline army, they also have the dictation of placing terrain separate or putting
Hmm.
something like crates or whatever on an objective, making that objective completely out in the open. So not to deter from the UKTC terrain, but actually I disagree with that point made because if you now some events do it different, but player place terrain I think is the worst way to do it because if you don't go into each game knowing that you can at least hide a unit on an objective, it's super dangerous. So
Yeah.
say for example, I don't know, you win a roll off and you go, okay, I want to put this big piece of terrain at this point where I can move my army into, fantastic. But if you fail that roll off and your opponent takes that terrain and goes, I'm going to put this massive piece on the side of, like in the middle of nowhere, which is completely useless, that's going to put you at a big disadvantage straight away. So it's like another roll off that you have to win. So I don't like adding that. I'd rather walk to a table and know what all the terrain is, design my list or have a plan in mind for that deployment. And that's what's good with the UKTC. The UKTC has all fixed terrain and they have a map pack so you can read it and look at it before the tournament. And before each game, you know what you're going to get into in terms of the mission, the deployment of the objectives, and the deployment of the positioning of the objectives and the terrain and whether they like cover the objectives or not. And that allows me to, at least with Space Wolves, pre-plan on how I split my army, what I put in reserve, and what I put in deep strike. So that's how it's quite effective in that sense.
Mm.
And although I have loads of units, and I've actually had friends in my chat groups who are interested in playing Space Wolves now, message me and go, "Oh, how do you even deploy this army?" And I go, "Well, it's actually a lot simpler than you think because, say, for example, the L that's in your quarter, you can layer backup units back there. You don't have to put everything on the line. The whole point of the army is you kind of feed a unit here, a unit there. You buff up the, you can use a stratagem to put a unit into the assault doctrine, move it out, um, attack a unit, and you're kind of constantly trading up, or you're trying to trade up throughout the game. That's the whole point of the list.
Hmm.
And then you've got the Wolfen giving backup where needed. Excuse me, and then covering an objective with fight on death if required. So that's where the premises of it doesn't really necessarily matter what the terrain's like. It just depends on like your plan going into each mission and each deployment that you know with the terrain pack.
All right. Okay. I just had a thought, and I figured I'm going to ask about that as well before we go into your games. One of the armies that has really spiked in popularity in Ark development seems to be Genestealer cults. Like, it seems that many players are turning to it for a good reason because the army is strong. It has very strong secondaries right now, albeit also a high skill cap or skill ceiling. But the numbers are growing. You in your army have very little from the Space Marine arsenal to actually push them away. So you said that you didn't go for the troops. You didn't take infiltrators, for example. Um, would you change that now, taking into consideration that GSC is a threat, or there is no reason to do that?
So that goes down to what I'm expecting at the event.
Yeah.
So if there was, you know, a legendary GSC player turning up to the event, one of my friends, for example, Eric Leatherhouse, I can never say his surname. I think that's how you say it.
Thoris, yeah,
Lethor,
uh-huh.
yeah, whatever. No, I'm just joking, Eric. I love you, really. Um, captain of the Australian team,
Mhm.
fantastic guy, brilliant player. If he was just to rock up to Manchester GT, I would definitely have infiltrators every single day of the week,
Right.
knowing that he would play and run rings around me if I didn't otherwise. Um, the second reason is I have so many units, I feel like I can just trade up against GSC. So GSC are very good at popping up on turn 2 and 3 and decimating what's out and what you leave out.
Mhm.
So the idea against them would be I would throw my Skyclaws out, who are the weakest unit in my army, maybe on some flanks put a Wolfen unit or whatever, um, but in a way that they can only be affected by combat. So at least they get to fight on death, say for example on an objective behind a wall or whatever. Um, and then the rest would just sit and wait. And once he's popped up, done all his damage, killed like perhaps let's say all my Skyclaws, or let's say 2 Skyclaws and a Wolfen unit or something, then I'll do my counter attack, and then that's when my reserves come in. Or if he's going second, he has to wait potentially for my reserves, which pushes him back to turn 3. So there's ways and means you can play the game, and he has to also be careful of not overextending because the amount of damage just one unit Wolfgard could do to an entire unit of 20 neophytes, as an example.
Yeah.
I can wipe out a GSC army in one go if he's too close, and I also have the backfield completely covered with the Desolators, because if he lands within 12 inches, I can use Allspec Scan, and that unit will just remove 20, what do you call them, neophytes.
Absolutely.
So I do have ways and means to deal with that army, so I wasn't necessarily overly fussed about not having infiltrators. The infiltrators is like an additional
It's a
buffer
tax
against
still.
them. But it's still exactly, it's just a tax compared to I've got all these other trading units. I could just put 6 Skyfalls out. They're the same points as 5 infiltrators, but at least in other games they do something. In this game, okay, they're not as great, but they can still block 9 inches of the board over there, and they can still potentially go kill stuff if you leave them alone. So
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, folks, I think we are done talking about the list. Alex has taken us on a journey through his reasoning, his philosophy behind the list, how the list plays into certain armies, and basically how it finds its way on the tables against various opponents. This is where we will pause and we will finish the first episode. I hope you enjoyed it a lot. Make sure that you tune in to our second episode that is going to go very, very in depth into the matchups and how Alex played, what worked, what didn't work. You know most of the details probably from various websites and descriptions, but still, I think it's worth it both for Space Wolves players and people who are going to be facing Space Wolves in the very near future. So do tune in for an episode that will release probably in a day or two. At the same time, I would like to remind you to comment, like, subscribe, especially comment because we're interested in what you have to say. We would also like to know what you want to listen about in the future episodes. So definitely the next two are going to be, well, the continuation of the interview with Alex, and then we are going to have an interview with Pumba talking about the Krakow Arena, um, which was also won by Space Marines, but we will not tell you which ones until you tune in and find out for yourself. And then, yeah, it's all in your hands. So let us know what you're interested in, be it tactics, team play, singles, predictions of what the 10th edition might bring. Um, whatever you wish, we will comply. So, yeah, tune in. And for now, thank you. So, until next time.